The food service, hospitality, and retail industries are evolving in ways you've never heard of until now. Hosted by global industry technovator Rob Grimes and powered by the IFBTA, TechBytes is your go-to podcast, putting technology innovation and trends on the menu.
So welcome to a special edition. Maybe we should call this like the summer edition or something of TechBytes by the IFBTA. And once again, and it seems like we did this yesterday, I have Danny Klein, and Danny Klein's with QSR and FSR. But more importantly, as we head into the fall and into September, you really sort of hit the fall season off with QSR Evolution Conference.
That's right. This will be the fourth year, and I guess for us, this is the fourth time we've done a preview. I believe you and I chatted the very first year. So yes, in September 8th to the 10th. So it is.
Except I got to miss last year.
That's true.
Unfortunately or fortunately, I better not say unfortunately because people will hear it. But fortunately, had a grandchild, and right then and there, and so we sent Lauren ahead, who participates all the time, and I know she'll be speaking again this year. But I ended up missing one of four, so I've missed 25%.
That's okay, as long as you're back. That is all that matters.
Well, we'll be there. So why don't we just sort of start with sort of the highlight? And for those who don't know what QSR Evolution is, maybe we just sort of start with the premise behind it and then what may be special about this year.
So the premise behind the event, when we launched it 4 years ago, I think as an industry, we were getting very tired of talking about the pandemic. So, really, really quick story. I actually don't think I've told you this one. It was originally called QS Revolution. It was this and it was supposed to be, it was supposed to be like a pun with our QSR logo, and our designer had written it out. And the idea was kind of this, very obvious revolution idea. And when I started to send it out to different brands and potential speakers, they kept responding back to me, oh, QSR Evolution looks kind of interesting. And I didn't really want to correct them and say, actually, it's QS Revolution. Did you not catch my pun? So eventually I got to a point where I just accepted that the conference was called QSR Evolution. And I pretended that I never did that in the first place. And I went back to the designer and I'm like, just push the R, back into place and add an E, and we'll just act like that never happened. But from a premise standpoint, it's taught me a kind of an interesting lesson on how this was being accepted by the industry, which is I think they wanted to have some sort of conversation that was less about pandemic trials and things that happened and how we survived, and start to talk about the future. So for me, in a very crowded restaurant circuit, I had been in the industry a long enough time to know how a lot of it worked. I wanted to do something that felt very much like us as a media brand, something that was along kind of my view of content. So it became a very content forward type of conference, with a lot of things surrounding that. But it caused my life to be very, very difficult in year one because I was doing all sorts of crazy things in terms of like having these 30-minute fireside chats, flipping the rooms over. I think I had 180 speakers that first year. So year 2, 3, 4, I've tried to keep versions of that still going, although maybe leveling it out a little bit. This year, we're only in the 165 range of speakers. But the point being, it's meant to be a place that you go to learn and to get education and to really go for the content itself as much as, other parts of a conference. And that's not a knock on other events. I've been to them. I go to them for different reasons. And in this case, I wanted you to come first for the content. So,
well, I'm trying to think about how we're going to weave that in and how I can give you a hard time about the revolution versus evolution, going forward. But, maybe since you've evolved, maybe you'll have a revolution coming up, or maybe you take if you want to do a play on the words, you can do QS and then put a what it was, a half a parenthesis or whatever it is on the R. You're the writer, right? And then like this, so that you got the revolution in there, but you still have the evolution. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, it kind of looked like what you're saying. The first go at it. It's just I don't know why nobody got it.
Well, you know,
but they didn't.
well, as a writer who, you cover the industry and you know what's going on all the time and you're talking to people all the time, do you think that as we look at, like I've talked to a lot of people in the last couple of weeks, about how the industry is doing right now. And I sort of hear a lot of challenges in the industry, but I also hear a lot of evolution of the industry and I hear a lot of new ideas coming up. And so how do you infuse that, and what is going to be infused in somebody that attends, the conference coming up? And by the way, conference is in Atlanta on September
8th to the 10th.
That was a test. Okay, so you passed the test. So why don't you, from your perspective, let us know where you see the industry today and how you see that infused in the upcoming conference.
So something else that's unique about this conference is, and again, going back to what's a theme of making my life difficult, is when I make the agenda, I sit down and I make it as the same person who you mentioned talks to people and understands kind of the challenges facing the industry. So you're not really getting an agenda that's maybe crafted by, some larger outside in perspective that maybe is serving whatever point it's serving. In my case, I don't do that. All I'm doing is sitting down and putting topics down that I keep hearing about. And I think one of the after effects of that, as crazy as it might be, is that I tend to have topics that I think are hopefully important to people, because they are the things that I'm writing about. So, for example, and the other part of that too is I try to do a really good job of listening to feedback every single year. I, of course, have come to learn that survey feedback sometimes is not worth listening to because it either draws someone who's either very angry or very happy, and
it's like Yelp reviews.
Right. But I usually can hear from people like from the floor or like afterwards, and they might tell me like what they're seeing or they want me to change. And that's what led last year to us dedicating an entire track just to labor issues. So I've kind of come up with this version over the years where I took labor issues, I added more topics on that. I took away franchising issues because basically the feedback I got was that this isn't exactly the conference for franchising. Not that it doesn't come into play and you don't want to have some content. I have about 4 panels on it, but I don't have a 2 days worth of franchising content like I did in year 2. So learn that lesson. So I kind of tried to make the conference for the people coming to it, which was labor, technology, franchising and growth, fast casual versus QSR, and then there's a leadership track, which is basically fireside chats, and then something new I'm doing this year, which are what I'm calling CEO to CEO chats, which are basically a digital YouTube product that I launched about a year ago that I'm just taking to a public setting, which is exactly what it sounds, which is no moderator, CEO ask questions for the panel. But
well, I think that's sort of so, but the CEOs are talking to the CEOs.
Right. So
it's like a chat between them, right? But in public.
Yeah. Yep. So we have 4 of those, I think. So I'll give like an example. We have Troy Hooper of Pepper Lunch and then Jason Morgan of Original Chop Shop. And it was actually one of those things like where I asked one of them, like, who might you want to do this with? And there was a few options. And then I asked him the same question. And
why don't you ask them who they don't want to do it with and then just put them both up there?
Yeah. That'd be fun next year. But yeah,
there's an idea.
Yeah,
for the revolution.
CEO to CEO, the hate panel. But yeah, and in this case, yeah. So the idea is that they're just up there. I am giving them sort of the leeway to ask each other whatever they feel like, which is very similar to what we're doing on YouTube. And then, but in this case, you also have a crowd to ask questions to. So I'm actually pretty excited about those. We have, like I said, we have a couple of full service versions too. Josh Kern and Tony Roma's CEO. Jennifer Dodd is doing one with Claudia from Fuku. So we have a few of those going on that I think will be kind of different than what we've done in the past.
But you try to mix it up, because I took a look also at the agenda and you have some really big name speakers in there too. I mean, Chick-fil-A, and you got Burger King in there, and you got a number of also big name main stage, types of speakers. But as you're pointing out, you're also mixing it up between all the different groups and the segments in there as well. Is there a sweet spot of somebody who attends?
Yeah, so year one, when we were going to do this conference, I had somebody kind of reach out to me on the like large scale QSR space, a very big brand, and they just said like that we don't really have a conference that's kind of geared toward us in particular. Because I guess if you look around, a lot of the events are sort of more emerging brands or fast casuals and sort of sprinkling some QSRs. And since we are QSR magazine, it made some sense for us to kind of take that approach into the spotlight. So there is definitely a mixture where you have plenty of basically every type of brand you could think of. So as an attendee, I do get asked that question a lot. I mean, I don't think there's a counter service person from independent to large chain that wouldn't find some purpose to be here. And I'll also throw in, and I know we're going to talk about this, but we do have 2 tracks dedicated to full service restaurant content too. So it is not only for QSR folks. That's just been kind of the main part of
I
it.
just in general, I got a question for you. Do you think that QSR as a publication, and I'm about to put you on the spot, is going to evolve or revolt, one of the two, in its meaning? Because, what is QSR today versus fast casual? Some fast casual look like QSR. And then you have these, as you're calling it, I call them full service, not necessarily sit down dining, but the full service who are operating limited service or end up in places like vending machines, which could be QSR in a box, So I don't know. It seems to me that you would have something for everybody because all of these brands are actually finding themselves in new and different places.
All right, so I'm going to try. I'll try to answer that question without talking for 25 minutes. This actually comes up on my podcast a lot. So the answer to that in a short version is yes. I would say, I think it was 2017, maybe somewhere around then. We launched this thing called Fast Casual 2.0. And at that time in history, it was very relevant because you had all these brands that were kind of coming up into the picture, new concepts, modern markets, and pizzas, these kind of brands that were not like Chipotle, they were like a step higher, right? So no one really knew what to call them, but they were all over the place. So we came up with this idea called Fast Casual 2.0. We launched it on the cover. We started to cover it. We did this kind of traveling around the country meetup series where we would go to different, and we'd pop into like Denver and invite these type of brands. And it was a real movement at that time. But last year, so we had a main signature report for it called the 40/40, which is basically 40 concepts with 40 or fewer units. I scrapped it last year for a few reasons. One being we had done it for so many years, we were really getting to a point where if I could just find you, I was putting you on that list, because the idea was it was supposed to change every time. But the other part of that was just basically recognizing what you said, which is that I think coming out of all the revolution, we'll keep bringing that up, of the pandemic, we moved less toward that version of counter service and more toward there being blurred lines between the different categories. So I'm of the feeling, and I think you are too, that QSR and fast casual are closer together than they are further apart these days, thanks to things like the drive-through and technology, and also QSR brands really kind of being forced to react. And I think what we've done here at QSR is I've had to basically segment that into a separate category. So
Right.
like I call that fast food now. So like, Burger King.
Wait. You're not supposed to do that. I think there was a reason, right? Because it used to be called fast food. And, I got it, the quick service. There were probably some reasons way back when why people didn't like the idea of fast food as the title. So, that's how we evolved to where we are today.
Right.
But I can see that. Now, at the same time, you have other industry segments. I'm sort of curious whether those segments show up as well, like the C-stores where you see the marriage between QSR, fast casual, inside of convenience stores. Do those other groups come as well? Do the airports come? Do the hotel guys come? Because there's marriages between all of them.
So the C-store guys kind of come. A lot of people probably don't know this, but I also direct a C-store magazine called CSD, or C-Store Decisions. That's part of our food service portfolio. So we do market to them a little bit, like, hey, we have this quick service restaurant conference that might appeal to you. And some of them do register. Like, I actually saw one come in a few hours ago from Quick Trip. But by and large, there's not a ton of them. That isn't to say that this doesn't appeal to them. In my opinion, it does. It's just there are a lot of C-store conferences, including ours, just called Connections. And my guess is they probably pick and choose where they go. But that said, there are probably, like, I don't know, maybe 20 or so that I've seen register. But I don't have them like on the agenda. And I will say it has crossed my mind, and it did this year, that I should think about making a panel for this. And I think I will in the future.
Making a panel ends up being in a crossover track, right? So
I have to kind of There's things to consider about that with like audience and sponsors and stuff.
Yeah.
But I do think it makes sense, and there's probably a future where we're doing some cross-branded webinars between QSR and CSD and stuff. But
since you brought it up, you have sponsors, you have an audience that's there. So how many people generally attend? I know you do also have like a open exhibition or a showcase area as well. How do those things work? And then also, what other things surround this? I mean, there's some social and networking things. What are the other components?
So this year is going to feel a little bit different. We moved hotels. We moved down the street to the Grand Hyatt for a lot of reasons. One being that the Marriott Marquis, all iconic things aside, was a little bit old. Especially when it came down to the spaces where we're having panels and stuff.
I opened that hotel when I worked for Marriott.
I mean, it's
but you used the word old, so maybe I shouldn't admit to that.
There are a few hotels that you walk into and are that impressive inside, but It's just like it was a little tough downstairs, and also it was just time to change. But one of the reasons that we went to the Hyatt was that the floor plan of the showcase floor, like you're saying,
it was around.
It allowed us to basically have like a big square. So, like last year we'd have some tables and stuff that were like under a staircase, and it was just like, that's not ideal for anybody. So this is much more friendly to the vendor and to the partner, who is able now to basically be in this one large square that's surrounded by, different things. So it's going to flow better. Obviously I will see it when I get there in terms of like how it actually looks at the end, but it was designed to be a little bit more open for vendors to interact with operators. In terms of your other question, we do like to have, some kind of fun stuff. Somebody once told me that this conference is the punk rock of restaurant conferences, which took me a second to kind of digest and figure out what he was trying to say to me. But we have had some unique stuff. Like this year, we're doing an 80s party. We're bringing back
disco.
I'm not exactly sure what we're going to do, but it was inspired by Chick-fil-A's welcome reception keynote they're doing that night, which is talking about a lot of stuff. But, this is their 80th year in business, and that's kind of the campaign. So I was having a conversation with someone on my team, and we're like, well, we can't do like a party from 80 years ago. It's like World War II, it makes no sense. So we decided, we're like, okay, well, we'll do a 80s party for 80 years is what we're calling it. And it's not Chick-fil-A themed or anything like that, but it just gave us an excuse to have like a fun theme. And then the women in leadership reception is coming back. This will be the 4. This is where it started. This is year 4. But yeah, beyond that, it's that's kind of the story, I guess.
All right. Well, look, how about as far as, the other parts, because you mentioned the 2 tracks. Now you have a next gen piece as well. that's in there. I didn't mix that up, I don't think, with the two tracks because the tracks were different. So, what about that?
Yeah, so the Next Gen Restaurant Summit is what we call our full service content arm. So in past years, it was two separate conferences co-located, which really means one conference,
Right, different tracks.
different tracks. But we had two different websites. The branding is different. So this year going into it, we're like, well, let's just have one conference, because the thing was everybody called it QSR Evolution, even the next gen people. So this year it's just QSR Evolution with 5 content panels happening at once on QSR content, and then 2 panels of full service content, or what you would call next gen content.
And that's how you see the tracks. That's what you refer to. It's the two different
Well,
tracks.
the things I was referring to earlier were actually all just QSR tracks, and then next gen tracks are 2 separate tracks. So you have 7. The only thing you really need to know, Rob, is that there's 7. When you walk into the panel room, there's 7 choices. 5 of them are geared toward QSR operators, and 2 of them are geared toward full service operators. And along those 7 different options, you have labor, tech, leadership, whatever I mentioned before.
I'm trying to
So
think if there's some
I'll be coming
initials
to
in
blur.
that, but labor, tech, leadership, I get it.
Franchising, growth, fast casual, and then the 2 full service topics are kind of like the same. One of them is kind of like a leadership ish type thing, and the other one's just about more holistic things, because you only have two of them, so they're not as like
Well, we should work on an acronym so that people remember all the subjects. But of course, it would change every year. So
yeah.
I don't know how we would do that, right?
It's starting to settle in though. Like this year's tracks are pretty much the same as last year's tracks. The only difference is I just have more of them. And then also last year we had pizza as like a separate thing. We're not doing that this
Right.
year.
Same main subjects, but, different perspective every year, and different things get hot and cold, and they just seem to be the same, right?
Yeah, and different topics within those tracks. So the labor topics this year are different than the labor topics last year. Like last year, I had 2 lawyers and someone from the National Restaurant Association come and talk about Trump stuff. Not doing that this year because it's just kind of not the pulsing thing, although it's always there. But so
You
every
realize you're
year.
in Georgia, right?
Well, I mean, it's it was
Okay.
actually a
Well, anyway,
it was a really interesting panel, honestly. But
I'm sure.
I didn't really, yeah, it was like Trump era legal laws or whatever. But point being that the labor is like an umbrella that sits anything that's relevant underneath it, if that makes
So, are there
sense.
any special sessions? I was looking at some of the keynotes and people there. Do you want to highlight some of those?
Yeah. So the keynotes this year, I feel really great about this part. The truth is that getting keynotes, that's always the most difficult thing in any conference planning situation. And going back to the very start of this process, another time in my life where I wonder, why did I make this so difficult? Most conferences you might have a closing and an opening, or you may just have one real keynote and then some sort of like more leadership based thing. But I've got 6 keynotes this year, which is honestly a little bit insane, but I'm happy to bring it to folks. So last year we started to do a keynote on the opening night. So like where you would have a welcome reception, we dropped this one. Andrew Cathy last year came from Chick-fil-A and did this really cool welcome to Atlanta type of deal. So we're doing that again, but this time instead of Andrew, it's the president of Chick-fil-A, Susanna Frost, who has never spoken at a conference period anywhere. So this will be the first time that she comes and talks, and I'm actually interviewing her, which I didn't interview anyone last year. So that's a change. And then after that, we're going to open the conference on the kind of first full day with Tom Curtis from Burger King, which Tom has spoken here in different capacities in the past, and he's just really a funny, insightful guy. But I think again, to like talk about kind of like what's happening in the industry, is there a more sort of pressing story these days than Burger King, right? So we're really hitting that at the time when the Burger King comeback story is ever present for the industry. So very excited about that one. And then White Castle CEO is the closing keynote on day one. I am a huge personal fan of that brand, as they know. I tried to be in their Cravers Hall of Fame once, but I didn't make it. But I wrote a cover story on them years ago when they turned 100 years old. I'm from New York. I just have always loved White Castle. But beyond that, Lisa Ingram is, she's third generation
Yep.
CEO. Her father was CEO for 5 decades. I mean, they're just a super unique and amazing brand to really have up there. Following morning, Shake Shack CEO Rob Lynch. Honestly, is a long time coming, in my opinion, for us.
Yeah, and
He was,
he used to live in Atlanta, or he did, but he's had,
yeah,
he
yeah,
was with Inspire, I think, and then the pizza, Papa John's, and
yep.
so he's
So he was with Arby's. He was kind of there during the We Have the Meats, resurgence, and then he was Papa John's CEO, and he spoke as Papa John's CEO at our first conference, but as a fireside and not a keynote. Then he goes to Shake Shack. Shake Shack moves down to Atlanta, so they have Atlanta and New York City offices now. And it just made a lot of sense to come have him. He is a really great speaker, so
absolutely.
incredibly charismatic guy. Really excited about that one. And then we're closing with Texas Roadhouse CEO Jerry Morgan, which also is a long time coming. He actually came as an attendee to the first conference, and I remember seeing his name come in, and I was just like, what is he doing registering? Like I just sort of, helped him out, but I was excited to see him. And I have written about Texas Roadhouse as long as I have been covering restaurants, and just a brand that I think everybody admires. And Jerry is the reason I had Jerry close. And I think people will find this out. First of all, I think it's very important for your closing keynote speaker to be as exciting as any other person you have on the agenda, because of course you want people to not decide to duck out.
Right.
But the other part of that is, I would think it's very important, like how they punctuate the message out the door. And he is, aside from being like an operator first type leader, he's also got this kind of coaching, inspirational energy about him that I think will set the type of tone I want people to end the event with, and then go start thinking about how they felt about this conference. And the only one that and then there's another thing we're doing that's new this year that I left out there for a second, which is we're having Scott Greenberg,
Right.
who's like he was a former franchisee of Edible, but he's written some of the industry's most cited and well-known books for franchising and leadership and employee sort of management and things of that nature. He's going to speak before White Castle. So I've never had a keynote speaker who wasn't like a straight operator from a brand. But in talking to him, so he was on a panel year 1 or year 2. Year 3, he did a workshop. And then when it came down to year 4 and him and I were talking, I'm like, I've seen you speak enough to know the type of value I think this will add.
Right.
And I think it will mix up kind of the aspirational keynote style of like a Burger King with someone who gives you actionable insight that you could take to like running your business from a more general standpoint. So I think most people I've talked to know him. Like they'll be like, "Oh, you have Scott on there. I've seen
Yeah.
him at this franchise conference. He's awesome." But if you haven't met him and you haven't seen him speak, I think you're going to take a lot away from hearing him in addition to some of these really cool executives.
Well, I think that there's obviously a lot on the plate coming
Yeah.
up, and it's September 8th through 10th in Atlanta at the Hyatt Regency. So if you go to the wrong hotel, they're going to steer you down the street there at the Hyatt Regency. And it sounds like a great program. I'm sorry I missed 25% of your programs, but I will be there, and I want to see the evolution of the revolution that is going on. So, Danny, I really appreciate everything you're bringing to the industry and your insight, but also everything you're sharing with us, the insight not only of your own inspiration of how this came to be, but also what you put into it each year.
Yeah, it's it's become. Truth is, I had a feeling this was going to be the case that first year, but it has become a huge part of my life. Sometimes, stressful, right? But at the same point, it's very much central, I think, to how we've grown as a media brand. I don't know how different that conversation would have looked had we not gotten into this and allowed our audience to come engage with each other in this fashion.
Hmm.
So it's worth it, is I guess what I'm trying to say. It's just
And if a person wants to register, they go
yeah, that's
to.
always important. Go to QSREvolutionConference.com. You'll see me post about it on social all the time. And if you are a restaurant operator, you can feel free to send me a message. I will help you make that process as seamless as possible. If you are not a restaurant operator, the partnership side of the engagement is something I will point you in the right direction.
There you
But
go. And certainly
that
the
is not my world.
IFBTA, will point people in the right direction as well. And we just appreciate not only being able to support it, but also having Lauren Selman up there and leading a panel and speaking. She's done a number of things, and it's great, to be engaged that way as well.
Yeah, she's I think her panel this year is it's basically about keeping technologies, and hospitality in check with each other on the full service side.
There
So
you
that'll be
go.
a good one. Yeah.
And that's in that technology track. What was it? Technology, labor,
See?
franchising. Hang on. Franchising. We didn't say HR because that's labor. What were the other
Leadership. So
leadership?
the which is called Take the Lead. But yeah.
Take the lead. Well,
I
great.
think
Well,
I think that's the other one. Yeah.
there
Yeah.
you go. Well,
Growth and fast casual is the other one.
very good.
It's
Well,
two
thank
major
you
ones.
once again for joining us and allowing us to participate and support. And I'll look forward to seeing you in a few weeks in Atlanta, the 8th through the 10th at the Hyatt Regency at QSR Evolution, almost was Revolution, for whatever reasons, and also Next Gen, which is now really part of.
Correct. You
So
got it right.
great. We will see you all there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
This podcast is brought to you by the International Food and Beverage Technology Association. The IFBTA is the industry's voice of food service, hospitality, and retail technology, providing thought leadership as your single, impartial, and go-to resource. The IFBTA offers in-person and online communities to connect with your peers, the exchange, an all-encompassing global technology resource, and an industry-wide professional education and certification program. The bottom line is the IFBTA is your place to gather, learn, and share in conversations like the one we're having today. Thank you for joining us on this episode of TechBytes, powered by the IFBTA. I'm Rob Grimes, your host, and I look forward to taking our next bite of technology together.